The treasure of Tai Shung. The prince sitting in the void. The Prince of Ho marched with 1,000 captains in bamboo armor and 10,000 archers with short bows to seize the wealth of the Lord of Shung. The Ka of Shung was old and weary of war, but when the drums thundered from the towers, he took up his great sword, which was called Shi, who equals all men, and went to the wall to defend his city. With his army led by 4 generals, and with 20 sun standards of crimson and yellow, the Prince of Ho attacked the south gate. He armed great war machines that hurled rocks and fireballs, fired a wooden cannon from the backs of elephants, and breached the south gate. And at last, after a great struggle, the city of Shung fell, and the Lord of Shung died, as did his sons and his ministers with him. So the Prince of Ho with wooden drums and jade bells entered the city of Shung through the south gate. Accompanied by the 4 generals and a large number of spearmen, he rode over the bodies of the slain, for the slaughter had been very great. When the Prince of Ho arrived at the Peony Palace, nothing remained but a mountain of ashes. He paused for a moment and raised his hand to salute the ruin of Shung. Then he turned his mount and galloped down the avenue of the 9 illustrious ancestors toward the Flame Tower, which was the treasure house of the Ka of Shung. Here, similarly, the Prince of Ho found only desolation. A fireball from one of his catapults had set fire to the library called the House of 10,000 Tongues. Also gone was the Temple of Sovereign Beauties, where day and night guards in padded armor guarded the great collection of the 7 arts. Nothing remained of Tai Shung's fabulous treasure. The Prince of Ho dismounted and advanced alone to the fallen door of the treasure house. All that remained was a large tablet placed on the back of a carved stone turtle. Upon it was a poem of such exquisite beauty that 100 scholars had made copies of it. This poem had been written by the first Lord of Shung, inscribed on the day the treasure house was completed. And the Prince of Ho read these words: "There are 4 valuable treasures, a beautiful woman, a brave son, and a good book are the first 3, and the memory of these 3 is the 4th treasure." The Prince of Ho leaned on his staff, bowed his head, and sending his thoughts toward the North Star, he uttered an inward prayer. "O sovereign heaven, celestial emperor, forgive human iniquity, for I have destroyed knowledge." Then Keen, the yellow emperor, whose throne is the North Star, inclined his ear to the prayer of the Prince of Ho, and sent him a spirit in the form of an old monk. When the Prince of Ho lifted his head after praying, he saw sitting on the head of the stone turtle a very old man wrapped in a faded cloak. The old man had white hair tied in a knot on his crown, a rough mustache, and a yellow crooked tooth. He leaned on a rough staff, and in one hand displayed the 4 pieces of a broken bowl. The Prince of Ho immediately understood that the old man was a genius. He paid homage to him, prostrating himself on the ground and touching the earth with his forehead 3 times. The 4 generals, who did not see the old man, remained silent in wonder. The genie accepted the Prince of Ho's greeting and extended his hand further with the 4 pieces of porcelain. "O mighty general, this is what you came to take. See the treasure for which you trampled the bodies of the dead. See the treasure of the house of Shung." Then the Prince of Ho beat his breast and groaned in a piteous voice, "Oh, the evil I have done! The spirits of my fathers will haunt me, my children will forget me, and my children's children will not make pilgrimages to my grave. It is evil enough that I killed many, but greater evil still is it to have killed knowledge. I killed many books, and I murdered beauty in its temple. I dishonored myself before heaven. I humbled myself before the earth. Not even death can right this wrong." The genie sitting on the turtle's head laughed through his single tooth with a dry, cackling laugh. "Oh, illustrious prince," laughed the old man, "will you never cease your vanity? What makes you believe, O little man in high shoes, that you could kill beauty. The Great One born from the mouth of the fish has said, "Can man destroy what he cannot create?" Beauty, Prince of Ho, is a spirit, and 10,000 archers cannot kill a spirit. Don't joke with me, the Prince of Ho pleaded. I am a ruined man in the eyes of my ancestors. Leave me to my sorrow, for I must make an offering to the voices of the books I have silenced forever. The heavenly emperor's messenger spoke in a strange language, and suddenly a chair appeared, with large cushions and a high back. The genie beckoned the Prince of Ho to sit. The generals marveled at seeing their prince sitting in the void, suspended in the air. The single-toothed genie gathered his clothes around him and addressed the Prince of Ho. If my lord, who thinks himself great enough to fear his own actions, listens to me, I will tell him a story from the book of the Shans of Heaven. I hear, O Holy One, replied the Prince of Ho. Then the genie narrated the mystery of immortal beauty. From the beginning of time, illustrious prince, there were men who loved beauty and sought to create images of it, each in his own way. Some images were very crude, some songs had no melody. But for the one who made them, each held a secret beauty. There was a wonder revealed in each form, which others could not see. Thus it was that the men of ancient times before the earthly emperors wrote on mountains, painted on rocks, and sang to the air. And all the genii who lived in the mountains and among the rocks saw, heard, and understood. And the yellow emperor understood, for he hears all, knows all, and understands all. And great times passed, and men built cities, and scholars were born, poets and musicians who played silk strings, and skillful metalworkers and ivory carvers, and those who polished gems. But I ask this, O Prince of Ho, from whence comes the thought that the scholar structures with 10,000 characters? Where does the poet gather the petals of his verse? What does he sing in the strings of music? Do these things emanate from the void? Or do you think, perhaps, that the Yellow Emperor sends a Gandharva to weave the spell? Most certainly not, Prince of Ho. The first dreamers never perished. The hope traced on the ancient rock is the same hope that speaks through the scholar's brush. The crude forms of man's first moldings live again in the perfection of Han. Century after century, time, neglect, war, and decay devour the treasures of the earth, but they do not touch the soul of beauty, nor corrupt its spirit in any way. Once upon a time, there was a potter who made a small plate, and when he finished it, he was happy because he had shaped beauty. And one day the plate broke. But the plate did not die. It became a spirit. 1,000 years later, another potter made the same plate. He didn't know it, but the plate formed from the moist clay by his turning wheel was the same plate reborn that had lived 1,000 years before. But just as a man gains a better body with each new birth, so the second time the plate that was born had a small handle added to it and was more graceful in line. And the little plate was very beautiful, and its life lasted 20 years, and it was broken again, and again it became a spirit. Again the little plate waited 1,000 years before another potter crafted it again. This time a pattern was added, but it was still the same spirit, the same beauty, the same plate. For all plates, like songs, poems, and good advice, are immortal. So each time this plate was broken, it waited, floating in the air, until another potter dreamed it up, and after 10 times on the wheel, the same little plate was one day carried to Shung's treasure house. Now it was delicate porcelain, patterned with tiny gold flowers, and so fragile that it seemed more like the spirit itself than an earthly thing. And in the treasure house of Shung, it broke again. This time, O Prince of Ho, You are the cause of its breaking." The genie threw the 4 pieces of porcelain at the prince's feet. "Do you think, O fool, that because these broken pieces will be buried again in the dust, you have destroyed beauty, and have the power to kill the spirit of even a small clay saucer? Tomorrow another dreamer will come. The saucer will live again, and it will continue to live until the end, when all men become spirits and sit together at the banquet of the Yellow Emperor. At that feast there will also be spirit bowls, so that each of the mandarins can drink his tea. So it is with all the works done by men. Do not mourn for the books you burned, for they will be rewritten again. Do not mourn for the poems you lost, for another poet will find them in his soul. Do not mourn for the songs you silenced, for they will continue to be sung for all eternity. We dream what we destroy, only to wake up and find that nothing is lost. With a ball of fire you set fire to the house of 10,000 tongues, but not one of those tongues was silenced, O Prince of Ho. Men sought to silence tongues from the beginning of the world, but the words of the first man will be spoken again by the last man, for tongues will not be silenced. Knowledge does not perish with its books, but men would perish without knowledge. So men will forever write books, and though they do not know it, they are forever writing the same book. A thought is never less ours than when we believe it to be ours. Thoughts are like birds, they fly from the sky and fly away again. Like the sacred phoenix, chief of all birds, they are immortal. Men may die for their thoughts because men are mortal. But thoughts never die at the hands of men, for thoughts are immortal. Therefore be content, Prince of Ho, to learn your lesson. Men cherish thoughts and dreams of beauty, and they protect them because they find them fragile things. Yet the single thread spun by the poet is stronger than all the ropes and cords in the world, and will one day bind all men together. A thin painting on its fragile silk may seem like something weak and tender, requiring constant protection, but that faint line is stronger than the mountains, older than the heavens, more enduring than time. O Prince, beauty must be served, not because she is fragile and needs protection, but because she is divine and deserves homage. O Prince of Ho, seek beauty, but do not seek her in the ashes of your treasure house. Seek her among the ruins of your own heart, created by your ambitions. O Prince, it is better to be the servant of beauty than the ruler of men. When he finished speaking, the genie gathered his cloak over his head and returned to the North Star. The Prince of Ho rose from his seat, which disappeared into space, and walked towards his generals. "I have a resolution," he said in a calm, firm voice. "I will return to my kingdom. Once back in my city, I will pass on my wealth to my son and wear the yellow cloak. I will devote my remaining days to 2 works. I will read the sutras to prepare for a nobler rebirth, and I will take up a potter's wheel and pray that the skill given to my hands will enable me to create a new body for the spirit of a broken bowl. My lords, I now know the mystery of the treasure of Tai Shung, the garden of the Count T. Here is the true and faithful account of the strange disappearance of the most excellent cousin thrice missing of Her Serene Majesty, the Empress of exquisite achievements. All certified by the seal of His Excellency Marquis Yin, Secretary of Secret Affairs. On the 11th day of the 9th moon of the year of the Wood Ox, the 17th year of His Majesty's glorious reign, Viscount Tai disappeared under very strange circumstances from the great varnished chair in the White Lily Palace. His Majesty, whose love for his people is beyond comprehension, summoned Marquis Yin, who is the head of the secret police, to his presence and addressed him thus: "Most honorable and excellent Marquis, we have received news that our beloved cousin Viscount Ti, who is no longer in office due to his age, disappeared a week ago from his parents' grand chair in the Palace of the White Lily. Investigate now the cause of this phenomenon, and if it happens that he was murdered by his enemies, investigate and destroy them. Once you fully resolve the disappearance, then present your report with all the details. After 4 months and 1 day, Marquis Yin approached the throne to make his report before the Empress. His Majesty received his Lord Secretary in the Hall of the Heavenly Dragons, to which he carried a magnificent box measuring a cubit on each side. The box was secured with tassels of yellow silk cords, knotted in the pattern of good fortune. Marquis Yin also carried a long scroll written in his exquisite hand on fine paper. The scroll was bound with red and gold brocade, and the stick was adorned with dragons carved from jade, each with 5 claws. The scroll was signed with Marquis Yin's great vermilion seals. This was what was written on the long scroll. The estates of His Excellency Viscount Ti are in the north, against the Great Wall, and were once bestowed upon the family of the Lords of Ti by the second Emperor of blessed memory. His late Excellency was 66th Mandarin of an unbroken line of Lords of the White Lily Palace. When His Excellency Viscount Ti was in his 22nd year, it happened that was the direct cause of his strange disappearance. One day in that year he set out from his palace garden on a white pony, his green tufted lance waving in the breeze, and took the broad road that led north, his great dogs running with him. After 2 hours he reached the gate in the wall that opened onto the eternal desert of Shamo, where only the spirits lived. At the gate, he found the captain of the gate, dressed in bamboo armor. At that time the hero Quan Shai was the captain of the North Gate, and he greeted Viscount Ti. "Hail, my Lord of Ti. What brings you to the Gate of Exile?" "My lord," replied the young Viscount, "I ride according to my fancy, and my fancy brought me here." The captain of the gate bowed his head in a hospitable gesture. "Will my Lord of Ti drink tea with me in the shadow of the old wall?" "I will drink tea with the brave hero Quan Shai, and my horse will rest, and my dogs will have water." And so it was that Viscount Ti learned the mysteries of the eternal desert, narrated by the guardian of the North Gate while they drank tea together. This is what he learned. "Brave captain of the secrets of Gobi, tell me of the old sand that is the mother of the world." The gatekeeper poured more tea and, stroking his black beard, replied, "I was guardian of this road for 20 years and never crossed the shadow of this tower. I will only tell you what I heard, my Lord Viscount, for I have seen nothing. This North Gate is the border of the mortal world. Beyond its shadow all is magic and sorcery. It is written that beyond the black sand is the enchanted city of Yo, where Master Lao Tse arrived riding on a green ox, and somewhere, beyond the mist that floats above the desert, are the genies, by the shores of the Scarlet Lake. There are also demons with horse heads, and monsters that devour human flesh, and the ghosts of evil men who were banished to die in the arena. My Lord Viscount, not even the bravest heroes of China would venture into the Shamo Desert, for there dwells death to destroy all who..." The Viscount instantly resolved to unravel the mystery we are now considering. "I will enter the arena and discover the spirit world for myself. I will dare what not even heroes have the courage to attempt. Prepare my horse, and chain my dogs to the wall." The captain of the gate pleaded with my Lord of Ti, with warnings that only served to further strengthen the young Viscount in his resolve. At last, the hero Quan Shai opened the gate, and the Lord of Ti rode into the eternal arena. And the dogs he had left tied to the ring in the wall howled in anguish, and the guardian of the gate wept as he sat in the shadow of the tower. Beyond the North Gate the road was narrow and winding, and all its length was strewn with the shining bones of criminals banished from China to die. My Lord of Yu rode for many hours. When night fell, he resolved to remain in the desert until morning, and then return to the North Gate by way of the Road of Bones. He was distraught. He had seen no ghosts or demons, and he slept beside his horse with his green tufted spear stuck in the ground. When my Lord of Yu awoke in the morning, He was astonished to discover he was in a strange place with many paths, all littered with bones, leading in different directions. He didn't know which to choose, so he decided to travel by the sun, heading south. All that day he walked along the paths of bones, and when the sun set, he knew he was lost. Everywhere the bones crossed and recrossed, and as far as the eye could see, the bones of the dead were piled up and scattered. Suddenly, an old man emerged from among the bones, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and a torn cloak. My Lord of Ti addressed him thus: "Venerable Father, can you show me the way back to the Middle Kingdom?" The old spirit laughed joyfully and bared his toothless gums. "There is no way back to the Middle Kingdom. You are in the enchanted sands of the eternal desert. Soon your bones will shine white in the sun." Saying this, the old man waved his thin arms in the air and, shrieking with laughter, ran back to the pile of bones. And Viscount T knew he had seen a ghost. When night fell, Viscount T resigned himself to death, knowing that he could not fight the old magic of Shamo. He saw many ghosts crawling among piles of bones, and their horrible screams froze his soul. It was well said that there was only death beyond the shadow of the wall. In an open space beside the trail, he decided to prepare for death. He had no water, and neither he nor his horse could live another day in the desert heat. As he was very tired, my lord fell asleep. Toward dawn, he awoke suddenly. The moon was full, and the black sands of the Gobi were bathed in silver light. To the north rose the walls and towers of a magic city, white and shining. The city seemed to float in the air, and was connected to the earth by a silver bridge that ended at its feet. And Viscount T knew in his heart that this was the enchanted city of Yo, reached by Master Lao Tzu riding on a green ox. Overwhelmed with wonder, my Lord of Yu took his spear in his hand, and crossing the silver bridge on foot, entered the city. Everywhere there were temples, gardens, and streams flowing over crystalline rocks. But he saw no living creature. Then my lord came to a small door and, passing through it, found himself in a small garden of rare beauty. At the far side of the garden was a circular gateway, and as my Lord T stood still, uncertain which way to go, a radiant figure appeared in that circular gateway. So splendid was the apparition that Viscount Ti fell to his knees and lowered the tip of his green-tufted spear. The maiden he beheld was exquisite, beyond any being in the mortal world. On her horse were jeweled pins that glittered with white fire. Her long cloak was of silver cloth, encircled by a belt of gems, and beside her stood a white crane with a crimson-rimmed head. The maiden spoke, her voice like the ringing of temple bells. "I am Li Li, genie of the city of Yo. You would surely have perished, foolish man, if I had not seen you in my metallic mirror. Why did you come to the eternal arena?" Viscount Ti replied, "I ride according to my fancy, and my fancy brought me here. Now, as your majesty well knows, genies and fairies are not like mortal creatures, for they have no hearts, nor do they know love or sorrow. But because they have no hearts, there is no evil in them, and in accord with laughter and song, they live like birds." And Li Li, the genie, caught the heart of the Lord of Ti in a net of smiles, and he forgot everything else, save the city of Yo and the magical moonlight that never ended. But when my Lord of Yu spoke of his love to the maiden, she only laughed and fled with her crane, for she understood nothing of love. But genies harbor no evil, and when Li Li saw that my lord the Viscount was overcome with great sorrow, she herself returned to him in the silver garden, saying, "My lord, alas! You do not know the ways of spirits. We are not born as mortals. We are created by the thoughts of poets. We live for thousands of years and never know sickness or suffering. We are always happy, and when it is time for us to die, we vanish like mist at dawn, and return to the moonbeams that compose our bodies. I cannot know your love because I have no soul." Then my Lord of You said, "Let me become a spirit like you, so that I may remain with you forever under the rays of the moon." And Li, the genie, shook his head. "That can't be, for you have an immortal soul, and when you die, you will become a spirit, not a genie. And you will never be able to sleep under the moonbeams again. So there is no way. My Lord pleaded with you, for us to unite, and for you to know what is in my heart." And Li, the genius of Yo, answered, "There is only one way, and a very difficult one. Since we are born from the thoughts of poets, I will tell you how I was born. Listen well. Once, centuries ago, there was a cruel emperor who disdained learning and made all the scholars, musicians, artists, and poets subject to slavery, so that no one would ridicule their ignorance. And he set these slaves to the task of building the Great Wall around the Middle Kingdom. And when they died of exhaustion, he threw their bodies into the mortar. Chang Yu, an old and sickly man, was a great poet of that time. And he was made to carry bricks to build the wall. And after many months, he collapsed under the weight and died with the blows of the slave drivers on his back. As Chang Yu lay dying, he happened to see a small wild flower growing among the rocks beside him. And as he looked at the flower, a great happiness filled his heart, and he muttered these words, "Beauty is eternal and will survive all evil human actions." With this noble poem in his heart, Chang Yu died, and I was born from that poem, for I am the happiness of Chang Yu's last moments. Viscount Ti remained silent when the genie of Yo paused, but there was great understanding in his heart. Then the genie of Yo continued, "No one knew the poem that was in Chang Yu's heart, and his corpse was thrown inside the wall. The little flower was crushed under a workman's foot, and I am all that remains. I, a soulless being, fashioned from the substance of a poem. I can gain a soul in only one way, when Chang Yu's poem becomes immortal, so that all men have its words in their hearts. When men give soul to beauty, then beauty will become immortal." My Lord of You looked at the face of Li, the genie. "If I can confer immortality to the words of Chang Yu, and then you have a soul, will you come with me to the White Lily Palace?" "I will go, my lord. But you little understand how difficult your task will be." "I cannot fail," said the Lord of You. "Look, I swear upon my spear, one day as the sun lay low over the western mountains, the captain of the north gate heard a faint knock at the great gate, and upon opening it, saw a man lying in the sand. Viscount Tai had returned from the magical desert to the Middle Kingdom. The captain took my lord to a small house where he lived, in the shadow of the Great Wall, and Quan Shai cared for my lord tenderly for many days. At last my Lord of Ti recovered his health, and learned that he had been absent for 5 years, and that everyone had presumed him dead. As your majesty knows, Viscount T rose to become a man of rare distinction, and a faithful servant of the Middle Kingdom. With your own hand, you honored him and made him governor of education, and he caused Chang Yu's poem to be circulated throughout the empire, with the words of the poem placed above the gates of learning, and through his efforts, the unknown poet Chang Yu was elevated to the distinction of a deceased worthy of veneration, with the title of Master of the Words of Profound Truth. Likewise, your majesty is aware that since my Lord of T never married, his brother's son inherits his estate. 10 years ago, his lordship asked to be relieved of his public office, so that he could retire to the White Lily Palace, there to begin the construction of his magical garden. He brought skilled workers from every province of China, and ordered them to build him a garden similar to that in the ghost city of Yo. Crystal trees, pearl blossoms, and waterfalls flowing over sapphire rocks were provided. All the vast treasures of the House of Ti were brought in, and the garden became a wonder of the world. And when it was completed, Viscount Ti came to sit in the great black chair and gaze into his magical garden, illuminated by an artificial moon. Can Her Majesty's Lord Secretary be bold enough to assume that his lordship believed that the magic garden somehow brought him closer to Li Li, the genie of Yo? One day about 5 years ago, Viscount Ti was stricken with a disease that renders a man's legs useless. He could no longer walk, but his wish was that every morning he be carried to the great chair so that he could look into his magic garden, and the Lord of Ti sat for many hours before the garden gate. This was learned from the chamberlain of his household. Most of the time he was taciturn, but occasionally he would repeat the words of the poet Chang Yu, "Beauty is eternal, and will outlive all human misdeeds." It was after he fell ill that my lord hired a famous sculptor to carve figures of Li Li and her white crane from white alabaster. He placed them in the lunar portal of his magic garden, just as he had seen her on that first occasion in the enchanted city. There was great joy in Viscount Ti's heart on the day of the mysterious disappearance, for he had learned that Chang Yu's words would be included in the imperial edition of 1,000 immortal poems. His satisfaction was intense, and he gazed long and deeply into the depths of the magic garden. The following night, the chamberlain arrived to supervise the transfer of Viscount Ti to his bed, when the great black chair was found empty, a remarkable circumstance because his lordship was unable to walk. A week after Viscount Ti's disappearance, His Imperial Majesty ordered me to investigate the events. I immediately traveled to the northern province and made every possible investigation. Mine was a thorough one, but I could discover no trace of my Lord Ti. I examined every part of the White Lily Palace in search of secret rooms, and I questioned all those who served his lordship. In the end, it seemed that the mystery would never be solved. Finding myself in this predicament, one of those happy thoughts occurred to me that revealed the superiority of my intellect, justifying His Majesty's confidence in me. I had perceived that near the White Lily Palace lived a venerable Taoist saint, endowed with the power of spiritual vision and able to transform base metals into gold. I hurried to his retreat to implore his help in resolving this strange circumstance, saying to him, "Most ancient and most wise father, will you inquire of the spirits concerning Viscount Ti's disappearance?" When he learned that His Majesty wished to find the answer to the question, he graciously undertook divination. This Taoist saint discovers secret things in bowls of water, and his wisdom is exceptional. I will now pass on to you his exact words, which are extraordinary and almost beyond belief. I perceive Viscount Ti, seated upon the great chair of the White Lily Palace. He is very ill, but there is joy in his heart, for he conferred immortality upon the poem of that excellent scholar, Chang Yu. Viscount Ti now speaks to the image of Li Li in the lunar portal of his magic garden, saying, "Beautiful genius of I have fulfilled the oath that I lent upon my spear, and Chang Yu's words are now preserved forever in the book of 1,000 immortal poems." Immediately, the alabaster image glows with a splendid light, and slowly comes to life. Li Li, with her white crane, walks through the portal and enters the garden, saying, "My lord, you have truly kept your word, and given me a soul. And because I have a soul, I am sad, for I see the sickness of your years. I know your pain, and the heart you gave me shares your sorrow. The lord of you, seated in the great chair, is looking into Li Li's eyes. He longs to rise and embrace her, but his limbs are dead." Now he speaks again. "Because you gave immortality to the beauty of a poem, you similarly granted healing to your body. Arise and come to me, let us enter the magic garden." And when Viscount Ti tries to rise from his chair, he discovers he can walk. and all his ailments and years are completely behind him. He enters the magic garden. He is once again the young man who dared to venture into the Shamo desert, and in his hand is the green tufted spear. These, your majesty, are the exact words of the holy monk, according to what he saw in his enchanted bowl. When the vision was fully related, I questioned the monk. Reverend sir, where shall I reveal it to you then, according to the will of Her Majesty the Empress? The monk replied, Your Excellency, Marquis of Yin, you and Li can seek him out in the magic garden. There, they will dwell together under the moonlight, where they will find their love. Your Majesty, I explained to the monk that this answer only complicated my difficulties. It was impossible for your lordship to be in the garden. The wise man became angry with me and refused to discuss the matter further. I then returned to the White Lily Palace, and being absolutely careful in all my actions due to the responsibilities Her Majesty had entrusted to me, I examined with great care all parts of the magic garden. Thus I came to discover the solution to the mystery. I would hesitate to present the facts due to the strangeness of the circumstances, were it not for the wisdom of Her Majesty, transcending all mortal limitations. The Marquis of Yin carefully lowered the scroll he was reading. He approached the small table on which the black box with its silk cords rested, and untied the knots with great delicacy, the light from the gems glinting on the surfaces of his fingernails. Then the Marquis of Yin lifted the top of the box, revealing a miniature garden, its plants and flowers fashioned from precious stones. This, your Majesty, is Viscount Ti's magic garden. You will perceive that it is extremely difficult to imagine his lordship being discovered here. Her Majesty the Empress of exquisite accomplishments was entranced by the beauty of the garden. She rose from her chair and requested the Marquis of Yin's assistance in approaching the garden, as His Majesty's feet were tied and it was difficult for her to walk unaided. Your Excellency, Marquis of Yin, this is truly a treasure beyond all price. You did well to bring it here, for I will build a palace to serve as its temple. But please tell me how you discovered Viscount Ti in this tiny garden. The Marquis of Yin put his hand into the sleeve of his cloak and took out a large, very fine water sapphire, a gem polished like a lens set in a green gold handle. If your Majesty is gracious enough to examine the garden with this stone, you will immediately perceive the solution to the extraordinary circumstance of the disappearance of his lordship, Viscount Ti. His Majesty held the lens to his eye and looked into the magic garden. My Lord of Yin, through the power of this gem one can perceive the artistic splendor in great detail, but it must be confessed that there are no traces that reveal the whereabouts of our beloved cousin, who disappeared 3 times. The Marquis of Yin folded his arms in the sleeves of his great coat, his attitude of majestic importance appropriately modified by the decorum of the occasion. Your Majesty will perceive the tiny image of Li and his white crane at the lunar portal, exactly as I described it in my report. With the aid of this lens, you will notice that the artistic finesse is so extraordinary down to the smallest detail that the genius of I seems alive. Master Fu of Yunnan, whom your Majesty has graciously employed on several occasions, did the carving, and in the consummate care of my methods in all things pertaining to your Majesty, I brought in the sculptor Fu to examine the image I made, and he not only informs me that the figure is not the work of your hands, but also questions whether any human being could fashion such a perfect figure. Her Majesty, the Empress of exquisite accomplishments, examined the statuette through the sapphire stone, then bowed her head in agreement. If your Majesty will turn the lens toward the spot I am now indicating, continued the Marquis of Yin, you will observe a second figure in the garden, equal in beauty and refinement to the first. This second figure is kneeling at the foot of the steps leading upward to the lunar portal. You will notice that it is the tiny image of a man wearing a breastplate of bamboo armor, holding before him a green tufted spear, the head of which points toward the ground. As your Majesty will no doubt understand, this tiny figure is a perfect likeness of His Excellency Viscount Ti. The skilled craftsman, Fu of Yunnan, reports that he was never commissioned to make this second figure. Her Majesty the Empress of Exquisite Accomplishments extended her hand to take the statue of Viscount Ti. At once, the Marquis of Yin opened his screen and placed it between Her Majesty and the figurine, saying, "Illustrious lady, I beg you not to touch the statue of Viscount Ti until I have revealed to you the entire secret of the magic garden." His Excellency Yin touched a hidden spring in the varnished base. A small secret compartment opened, revealing a blue glass globe the size of an egg. "Pheasant, it is my duty, with the spirit of complete integrity that motivates all my actions, to inform your Majesty that this is the magic moon of Yo, and that I am recognized, by its correct identification, as the most venerable Taoist monk who reads all natural secrets in his bowls of water. With your permission, have this room darkened." As the heavy brocade curtains fell over the windows, the magic moon of Yo cast long beams of blue light that flickered like moth wings around a candle. Reverently, the Marquis of Yin lifted the shining blue globe from the secret compartment and placed it on a small ledge at the top of the magic garden. Then the Lord Marquis offered his arm to the Empress. "Will your Majesty graciously return to your chair and observe what follows? When you sit down, your Majesty will stand in the same relationship to the garden as His Excellency Viscount Ti did the night he disappeared." When His Majesty sat down, he addressed the Marquis of Yin. "We trust, my Lord Marquis, that there is no likelihood of us fainting in a similar manner because of this experiment." The Marquis of Yin's attitude expressed a deep personal grievance, "Your Majesty. While the Lord of Yin guards your destiny, tragedy is impossible. Turn your attention to the magic garden, completely, without fear." The following is recorded according to the exact report of His Majesty himself, and is free from the possibility of even the most infinitesimal error. As Her Majesty looked, Yo's magic moon filled the entire room with a light as soft as that of the full moon. Then it slowly rose from the pedestal and hung in the air at the top of the chamber. Its pale rays enveloped the jeweled trees and the sapphire waterfall of the magic garden, and shone with an unearthly brilliance. Gradually the garden grew in size. The walls of the Sky Dragon's chamber opened and faded until the Empress, sitting in her chair, appeared at the threshold of the fairy world of Yo. The Marquis of Yin, standing beside the Empress, whispered in her ear, "When your Excellency, my Lord of Ti, built your magic garden and sat before it, you saw only what your Majesty perceived before the room darkened. But on that last day, when you learned that Cheng Yu's poem was included in the imperial edition of the 1,000 Immortal Poems, you fulfilled the oath sworn upon your spear. At dusk on that last day, Li Li produced this magic, and thus fulfilled the promise made in the ghost city of Gobi. As your Majesty knows, genies have secret powers that transcend the comprehension of mortals. Viscount Ti, under the magic of the glass moon, rose from his chair, as I have already related to you, and entered the magic garden. Observe the statues, your Majesty." And Her Majesty the Empress looked at the moon gate and saw that Li Li and his white crane had come to life. The kneeling figure of Viscount Ti also rose at that moment and approached Li Li's figure, saying, "Beloved maid of Yo, I have fulfilled my oath." Again the Marquis of Yin whispered into the Empress's ear, "It was at this moment, your Majesty, that Viscount Ti's chamberlain and servants arrived to carry your lordship to your bed. They carried lamps with them, thus destroying the moon magic. Then the figures returned to their miniature sizes, and Li Li and Viscount Ti were trapped in the garden like two tiny statues. The Empress inclined her head in gracious understanding, and continued to watch the scene now unfolding. Li Li, the genie of Yo, then spoke to Viscount Ti. "My beloved lord, because you kept your word, you gave me a soul, and because I have a soul shaped by the words of the poet Chang Yu, I am no longer a creature of the moonbeams, and I can go with you to the phoenix staircase that leads to the great palace of the immortals." And Li Li, who had been the genie of Yo, took Viscount Ti's hand, and they walked together through the magic garden. At the gate, a stairway seemed to be formed of moonbeams, and they ascended it together, and Viscount Ti leaned on the spear with the green plume. As Her Majesty the Empress watched, they climbed higher and higher, and finally disappeared into space. The Marquis of Yin ordered the curtains to be drawn, and instantly the magic ceased, and the jeweled garden lay upon the table, and the fairy moon returned to its pedestal. The Marquis of Yin spoke again. "Your Majesty, you will notice that the garden has returned to its natural size, but the figures of Li Li and Viscount Ti are no longer there. Thus, I had the pleasure of informing your Majesty that I have resolved Viscount Ti's disappearance from his parents' grand chair in the White Lily Palace. The intellectual adventure of Mrs. ManlyPHall. The hour of intellectual adventure. In the glorious years of Emperor Wang Li, there lived 3 friends of rare taste and superior achievements. The first was his lordship Fan Hanshu, a warrior outstanding in courage and discernment, and general-in-chief of the Green Banner armies. The second was His Excellency Count Chi Menfu, an expert in fine arts and privy councillor at the court of His Majesty the Emperor. The third was His Eminence the Venerable Sanjan, who had come from the north, High Abbot of the Monastery of the Sacred Hair of the Buddha. These exquisite men found extreme pleasure in devising ingenious intellectual diversions to entertain each other. Later, by a fortunate circumstance beyond the scope of this account, it happened that the beautiful and accomplished courtesan, Lady ManlyPHall, joined them in their amusements. She was a woman of select attainments and enjoyed the favor of an imperial prince, whose name it would be indiscreet to mention. It was the custom of these 3 exquisite men and the Lady ManlyPHall to meet every month on the night of the new moon. On the occasion we wish to describe, they met in the Plum Blossom Palace, conferred on the Lady ManlyPHall as a token of her deep esteem for the prince, whose name it would be in no good taste to reveal. When the time came for intellectual adventure, the 4 gathered around a large red teak table in the White Swan Chamber, and Lady ManlyPHall addressed them. "My lords, spiritual and temporal, according to the rules of our association, it is my opportunity to provide the substance of our adventure." Then he took out of the sleeve of his cloak small bags made of fine silk brocade, each one a different color. "These bags, my lords, contain incense composed of sandalwood and rare resins and essences. Each one is different, and only I know the formulas. In appropriate order, each of you will graciously choose one of the bags and burn the incense in the brass bowl placed before you. After inhaling the smoke, you will describe the ingredients and any other impressions that come to your minds." He took a delicately carved white saucer from the table drawer. "This precious piece of ancient jade will belong to whoever is most precise in their judgment." "Excellent, excellent," murmured the High Abbot in admiration. "The Lady ManlyPHall surpasses all other mortal women in the subtlety of her imagination. Here is a challenge worthy of our natural genius. Let us test it." Madame ManlyPHall smiled demurely and pointed at the table with the tip of her screen. "Will my Lord General make the first selection?" The illustrious Fan Hanshu chose the red pouch, and dropped the powder into the brass dish before him. Then he reached into the wide sash and took out a leather satchel containing the chain and flint he used to light his pipe. With a few deft flicks of the chain, the sparks lit the incense, and a small line of blue smoke rose before their faces. Then he spoke slowly. "I smell war in this smoke, not a war of men but of nature, a struggle between earth and sky. There are balm trees here, and from its strength and quality, the tree grew alone in some rocky place and fought against the dragons of wind and storm. My delicate nose also informs me that the soil was poor and contained much sulfur, so that the tree grew near volcanic soil. At one time, a man cooked meat under this tree, and the roots took on the flavor of the ashes of his fire. Although the soil was poor, there was considerable water in the vicinity, and the moisture was drawn toward the tree. From all these testimonies, supported by my supernatural intuition, I am of the opinion that this balm powder came from the shores of Lake Tar in the eastern province." "Is there anything else?" asked Mrs. Mindsee. "Only myrrh to confound my judgment, which, if my nose does not deceive me, Your Honor, was kept for some time in an ivory box." The High Abbot, who was given to mischievous jokes, observed, "It would seem that the energy that my Lord General squandered in the growth of his beard did not drain the strength of his nose." After an appropriate pause, to allow this humor to be appreciated, Mrs. Mindsee called the table again. "Will His Excellency the Count make his selection now?" Count Chinmen Fu chose the blue bag and lit the incense with a coal from the first bowl. Then he stood up and let the smoke rise to his face. He sniffed several times and then sat back down, his expression completely content. "This compound is more difficult than my Lord General's. It is truly fortunate that I am a well-traveled man and possessed of extraordinary talent, otherwise the test would have surpassed my skill. Many flowers are present in this powder, and from the manner of the mixture, the incense came from India. But all the scents have a common quality that tells me the flowers are from one region. That is why I was asked which part of India is so favored with natural wealth. There can be only one answer: Kashmir. The shrewd merchants who brought this scent so far in search of profit wished to be very sure of their gain, so they adulterated the powder with a kind of resin found only in Xinjiang. So I presume they came on camels along the caravan route in the North Country. Also, there is something rancid in the smoke, which suggests the powder was too expensive to be sold quickly. This is why your lordship was able to purchase the incense for a fraction of its true value. Because the scent wasn't strong, you added Canton perfumed oil, not to fool me, as you found the formula quite difficult, but because the lack of scent was disappointing. For a while no one spoke, and then the venerable abbot calmly observed, "I fear that the prospect of being the next to be examined prevents me from forming a proper acuity." He took the third bag, which was yellow, and gently brought it up to his nose before pouring out its contents. "I think I smell a medicinal aroma. We'll see." The dust burned slowly, emitting a heavy acrid vapor that the High Abbot seemed to gather with his screen, as soon as he found himself in the midst of a dense cloud. At last, he seemed satisfied. Venerable Sanjan's face was serious, but his eyes winked. "It's always like this, the joke returns to the joker. I'm the thinnest of us, and this powder is a remedy for the obese." True, it was hidden with saffron and spices, but burning mandrake cannot be hidden so easily. This medicine was It has been a Hong family secret for centuries, and there's no other place to buy it. It wouldn't be very kind to reveal its carefully guarded formula, so I'll look elsewhere for interesting things. He shielded the smoke further towards his face. "Your lordship ground this medicine into a powder. Just before that you picked lilies in the garden, and some fragrance lingered on your hands. The saffron was from your kitchen, for I detect the aroma of cooking food in it. You must have added the saffron at dusk, and the food I smell is what you served that evening. Is that not so?" Madame Maincy nodded happily, then addressed everyone. "It is extremely difficult to award the prize, for each of you correctly read the story of smoke. Therefore it seems to me that the prize belongs to His Excellency Count Chi Men Fu, for fate has bestowed upon him the most difficult of all compositions." Then the general spoke. These trials left only one thing to be desired. Because she arranged this intellectual adventure, it was not possible for Madame Maincy to compete with us for the prize. I would have appreciated your favor in sharing this test of skill with us. His Excellency the Count took the opportunity to say, "It is indeed fortunate that your lordship did not participate in this test, or I would certainly not have emerged victorious." Venerable Sanjan discreetly cleared his throat. "Perhaps it might be arranged that Lady Maincy participate in this admirable contest of intellects. If you will bear with me, I will tell you a curious tale." "I beg you to continue," thundered General-in-Chief Fan Hanshun. "We are fully attentive to the High Abbot's words. Unfortunately, my story is of considerable length, but I will tell it as briefly as possible." The Venerable Sanjan smoothed the front of his long robe and continued. "The monastery of the Sacred Hair of the Buddha stands on a high rock, by the shores of the ocean of sand. Near the gate is an old tower built of earth bricks and straw. This tower was erected to contain the relics of a very old Buddhist saint whose name is no longer remembered. 15 years ago, the old High Abbot of hallowed memory, who was my predecessor, knowing that his hour had come, called all the monks within the great hall to pray with him for a happy transition of his spirit to the western paradise of Amitabha. As we sat together turning the prayer wheel and chanting the mantras of our faith, this old and good man entered into his last meditation and departed from us into the great peace. While we were still praying, a storm came from the north, and in the midst of it, a lightning bolt struck the tower where the remains of the Arthur lay, unknown. After the storm had passed, I went with the monks to examine the damage. One side of the tower had been cut away as if by a sharp knife, revealing a small room. As the late abbot had appointed me his successor, the monks selected me to examine this room before we set about restoring the stupa. Carrying a yak oil lamp, I entered the small room and perceived against the far wall an ancient image of our Lord the Buddha. It was very crude and seemed to be made of coarse clay, and around its neck was a piece of red cloth, rotten with long age. The image's hands formed a narrow shelf in its lap, and on this shelf was a tiny golden tower, about 2 inches high. I knew it to be a most holy relic, and placing my lamp on the ground, I knelt and paid homage to the soul seeds of the unknown holy person. I then gathered the officials of our religious house and asked their consent regarding the proper disposition of the small golden reliquary. It was their decision that it should not be removed from the crumbling tomb, and that it should become the particular insignia of our monastery. In this way, its virtue would pass from one high abbot to another for the duration of our order. Among the monks, there was one skilled in metalworking, and he fashioned a gold chain and a case suitable for the small tower, just as a ring setting fits a precious stone. When I was enthroned as Lord Abbot, this chain was placed around my neck, and I will wear it all my life. Venerable Sanjan unfolded the shoulder of his shawl and took from within his robes a heavy gold pendant set with a turquoise. In the center of the delicate filigree was the small tower. The High Abbot removed the reliquary from its stand and placed it reverently on the table in the middle of the group. The 3 sages and Lady Maincy rose from their chairs and paid homage to the holy relic. The High Abbot resumed his tale. This golden tower contains 2 compartments. In the upper one are 7 circular pebbles, resembling pearls. These are commonly found among the ashes of a great arhat after the body has been cremated. They are the soul seeds I already mentioned. The lower compartment contains about a tablespoon of fine grey ashes. The brothers of our monastery share with me a deep and reverent desire to discover the identity of the old brother whose relics are before you. May I suggest that the gracious Lady ManlyPHall attempt to solve this riddle? Count Shi-Men-Fu, being well versed in all matters relating to elegance, held his breath between his teeth in expression of approval. The story is extraordinary, but how shall we restore a remote event from these venerable but scarce remains? Lady ManlyPHall gazed at the reliquary for several minutes. Then, she reached into the sleeve of her robe and drew out a small, slender dagger, its hilt inlaid with lucky bats carved from amber and jade. Placing the dagger in front of the small pagoda containing the relics of the unknown arhat, she addressed the 3 intellectuals. My lords, it occurs to me that this challenge presents insurmountable difficulties as far as our mental abilities are concerned. I regret to say that one must agree, thundered General-in-Chief Fan Hanshu, tugging vigorously at his mustache. Madame ManlyPHall bowed her head. My Lord General, you were always a man devastated by decorous modesty. Allow me then to offer my solution to this very stimulating problem. Using the ivory spoon from his inhalation bottle, his lordship reverently placed a few grains of the holy ashes on a flat jade disc before him. Then, raising his dagger, he deftly opened a small vein in his wrist and allowed several drops of blood to fall to mix with the ashes. A look of intense satisfaction and understanding came over Venerable Sanjan's face. He leaned forward and murmured, "The illustrious lady is wise in the learning of the North. Forgive me if I have undervalued your distinguished achievements." Lady ManlyPHall closed the vein in her wrist with pressure from her thumb, and watched as the red drops seemed to devour the grey dust. The spirit of the blood, my lords, will examine these circumstances. Only the blood knows all things. As the blood began to coagulate, it resembled a deep, round garnet, emitting flashes of dark red light. Slowly, Lady ManlyPHall stood up, gazing with intense concentration at the flames flickering around the surface of the jade disc. Calmly, she untied the folds of her heavily embroidered cloak and removed the kingfisher feather ornaments from her hair. My lords, we are in the presence of a mystery. Let us perform this sacrament with a humility appropriate to our intellectual superiority. General-in-Chief Fan Hanshu, commander of the armies of the Green Banner, and Count Shi-Men-Fu, Privy Councillor at the court of His Majesty the Emperor, calmly removed the insignia of their offices. They took off their rings, studded with precious stones from their fingers, and placed the various ornaments and decorations before the small reliquary on the table. Only the Venerable Sanjan remained motionless, except that he removed the beads of his rosary from the neck of his mantle. Lady ManlyPHall, wearing a plain white silk dress, stepped forward, and with her ivory spoon, lifted the blood gem and dropped it into the glowing coals of the brazier. At once, combustion erupted. Dense white smoke rose from the saucer and enveloped his lordship. In the midst of the smoke, she staggered as if in a trance. Venerable Sanjan breathlessly chanted a mantra, while his long, slender fingers flicked through the rosary beads one by one. Lady ManlyPHall then spoke in a distant, lifeless voice. My lords, spiritual and temporal, I will faithfully report to you what I perceive. My blood calls to me from the fire and tells a story to my mind, my heart, and my eyes. The Venerable Sanjan gently knelt before the table, and the Lord General and the High Abbot followed his example. The High Abbot murmured, "In this hour we perceive the perfect working of the law. The wheel of time turns back on its ancient axis." Mrs. ManlyPHall then gave her long but memorable narration. There is a road, behind it are the mountains, and beside the road is a peasant's hut. Long ago and far away, the sun is high and the earth is dry. A group of pilgrims is approaching. They are monks in yellow cloaks. Some are young, walking with firm steps. Others are old and weak, supporting themselves with long, heavy staffs. In the midst of the monks is one of many years and of very noble appearance. His head is shaved and his feet are bare, darkened by the dust of the road. He carries a clay bowl in one hand and in the other a staff with which he supports his steps. I look into his eyes, my lords, they are deep and wide, and in their depths are flames. And there are flames flickering around his head and shoulders. The monks are intoning an ancient song, and the air is filled with the music of flutes, drums, and clanging bells. Lady ManlyPHall stopped speaking, looking exhausted, and the venerable Sanjan looked at her face intently as she shivered in the blue-white vapors rising from the brazier. His lordship resumed the narrative. The monks arrived at the peasant's hut, and the saint, with flames in his eyes, knocked on the door. The others stood a short distance away, watching. The door opened, and the poor peasant stood at the entrance. He looked into the face of the old monk, then fell to his knees in prayer. The saint smiled peacefully and, without speaking, extended his begging bowl. Now, my lords, I perceive the activity of the peasant's mind. He was poor but very proud. His desire was to put something of great value into the monk's bowl, but he had nothing to give. But above all, he was proud and would not admit that he lacked means. Then he remembered there was a pot of food, and he also remembered that the food was spoiled by the heat. But he was also too proud to speak the truth, especially when many monks were watching him. So he entered the house and brought the pot, and with his bare hands he placed the food in the saint's bowl. All the while the monk's eyes were fixed on him, watching with a sad and patient smile in his heart. The poor peasant cannot bear the monk's eyes, and after filling the bowl, quickly goes back into the house. When he is alone, the peasant is overcome with guilt, knowing that his pride caused him to do a wrong. As he sits alone by the hearth, his spirit is troubled, and he begs forgiveness for the pride within him, and he feels very miserable. The monks continue their journey along the dusty road, and at dusk they come to a grove of fine trees and decide to spend the night there. They sit in a circle, and the old monk with the flames in his eyes sits with them on a low mound, with the food bowl on his lap. And the old monk speaks thus: "Venerable and beloved brothers, this is the end of my journey. I will inform you of the wonderful workings of the law." His voice sounds like the song of Veena, and the air is filled with the tinkling of silver bells. The monks listen intently as the saint explains a mystery to them. Before the beginning of the world this night was written, for on this very auspicious occasion comes the end of my karma. In a little house by the side of the road there lived a man with pride in his heart. The man, the house, the pride, and the pot of food, I. They waited for many ages and many lives. Today I stood face to face with the perfection of my destiny. One of the monks speaks, and his voice is altered. "Master, tell us the meaning of your words." The old monk looks at the bowl on his lap and replies, "This food is contaminated. When I eat it, I will die." The younger monk next to him speaks again, "Then throw it away, master. Share our food with us, there's plenty." The saint shakes his head. "It is the law of our brotherhood that our food shall be whatever is offered to us, and no part of it shall be rejected. As I told you, I have awaited this day from the beginning of my time, for here within this bowl flows the last stream of my karma." Lady ManlyPHall opened her eyes for a second and then sank back into the vision. A few days passed, and I see the peasant again. He is leaving his home. He is wearing a straw hat, he has a bundle on his back, and he is very humble, and all pride has vanished from him. His mind tells me that he is going out in search of the saint to ask forgiveness for his sin. He advances along the old dusty road, and at dusk he approaches a grove of fine trees. As he approaches, he perceives bright flames emerging from their midst, filling the sky with smoke. As he reaches the trees, a monk in a yellow cloak comes out to greet him. "Peace be with you, brother. Who are you seeking?" The peasant bows his head in shame. "I am a wretch. I have sinned, and I come seeking forgiveness from the old monk with flames in his eyes, who begged for food at the door of my hut." The yellow-robed monk remains silent and leads the peasant through the trees to the burning funeral pyre. The monk points to the fire. "Unhappy one, our master ate your contaminated food and abandoned us. His body is wasting away to this day." With a cry of despair, the peasant throws himself into the flames but is held back by several monks. "Let me die too, for my pride caused the death of a saint." Supported by the saints, the distressed peasant is led to a tall, thin monk who is alone. One says, "Ananda, he has arrived. Speak to him about the law." Ananda smiles gravely and sadly, and holds the peasant in his arms. "What binds through sin is unbound through righteousness. Our master ordered that we accept you, for through you he attained liberation. Many lives ago, before he received enlightenment, he had committed an evil deed against you. This was his last unpaid debt. This was the end of his karma. This is the perfect functioning of the law." Then the peasant cries, "But what about my current sin? For surely in my pride, I killed a sanctified person." Ananda smiles again, a very gentle smile. "That, my son, is the karma you must bear, until the one against whom you sinned frees you in the same way. Join our brotherhood and dedicate your life to good works. Serve the law, and in the fullness of time your error will be turned into right." 3 days and 3 nights pass. The holy ashes are cold. The saints' relics have been gathered by the monks into small clay towers, and the yellow-cloaked brothers have departed, intoning their old songs as they travel the dusty road that leads over the mountains and through the valleys to liberation. The peasant accompanies them, his head shaved. He wears the yellow cloak and, in his hand, the mendicant's bowl. Now I perceive that the peasant's contrition is sincere. He performs many wonderful deeds and becomes a celebrated arhat, having many disciples. Years pass, and he travels to remote places and lands. His merits become so numerous that the karma of 500 lifetimes is transmuted by virtuous acts. Now I see this sanctified and humble sage in the prime of his years. He is very old and very sick, and sitting with his disciples. By the bank of a brook, he addresses those around him. "Beloved brothers of the middle way, I can go no further. I have come to the end of my life. Here, in this quiet place, I must part from the toils of the flesh. Because of the evil deed my pride caused me to commit when I was young, I will not receive liberation in this life. I must be born again and walk the ways of the earth until I pay my debt to the man I wronged. Pray for me, my brothers, for my cause is hopeless. The only thing that can set me free has entered the great peace and will not be born again." At that hour the old saint hears the tinkling of silver bells, and knowing that the time has come to leave this life, he enters into the meditation that is the dissolution of the flesh. And what follows? The disciples neither see nor hear, but they are allowed to witness the consequences afterward. The air is filled with celestial music, and a procession of divine beings descends from the heavens. Amidst the splendid company of immortals stands the saint with flames in his eyes. He wears a simple cloak of yellow cloth and, in one hand, holds a mendicant's bowl. Descending from the luminous region, the saint approaches the dying saint and extends his bowl. The old monk, in his last meditation, sees the strange, peaceful face of the saint and sobs with anguish in his heart. "O beloved master, I have nothing to give you. O holy one with flames in your eyes, You alone can free me. You have entered nirvana. I can no longer repay the debt. There is no way out except your compassion. Forgive me my sin." The saint of the begging bowl smiles gently, and thousands of little lights flicker in his eyes and around his face as he speaks. "You preached the good law, performed the good deeds, and lived the good life. Look into my bowl. It will never be empty. Once, long ago, out of pride you filled this bowl with tainted food, but this day, out of humility you filled it again with the elixir of eternal bliss, distilled from the prayers of gratitude you earned through your selfless service. Herein lies the perfect working of the law. It is the custom of our brotherhood that food received must be eaten without refusing any part. Come then, let us share the contents of this bowl. Achieved liberation, not through the forgiveness of sin, but through the realization of virtue. This is the law beyond the law. Although the disciples do not understand the inner mystery taking place, they suddenly witness a miracle. The body of the dying saint is consumed before their eyes by an internal flame. In a few moments, all the remains are ashes and 7 shining stones. This is reverently collected in a clay dish and later placed in a small golden tower, along with some of the ashes. Lady Mind-C sat down slowly and looked attentively at the venerable abbot, the Lord General, and the Lord Earl, and then quickly completed her narrative. "My lords, spiritual and temporal, the soul seeds and ashes of this small golden tower are the relics of the man whose pride brought about the death of our Lord the Buddha. The house of singing floors. He perceived inwardly that a spirit wished to speak with him. The Marquis of Q was lord of 3 provinces and had many vassals, but he was not a superior man and could not write poetry. And because he was not a superior man, he had a small mind and big feet, and he did not reverence the 8 holy objects. When the venerable abbot of Chu Lung arrived with the sacred ashes, the Lord of Q laughed a great deal between his beard, saying, 'The dust of this foolish monk will find no rest in the land of my 3 provinces.' The saint of Chu Lung replied, 'Does the Marquis of Q not wish to accumulate merit for his next life? And because he was the son of Kai the fisherman, and because he was not a high man, and because he could not paint on fine silk, the Lord of Q answered, My father rots in the dark earth, and before long I shall lie beside him in the long silence. There is no other life than this. Go away, fool, and leave me the days that are still mine.' The Marquis of Q was proud, gloating over his strength, but his heart was deeply troubled, for he reasoned thus, 'I have laid waste many cities, killed the old men for their wealth, and I have also killed the children of those old men. And since I am rich, there are ambitious lords who envy my wealth, and will conspire for the sake of my possessions to destroy me.' And because he was not a superior man, and because he did not respect property, and because he had many enemies, the Lord Marquis feared dying before the prime of his years. But the Mandarin of Q had a cunning mind, and in the extremity of his fear, he devised means to preserve his life. He sent for the chamberlain of his household and addressed him with these words, 'My Lord Chamberlain, you shall choose the most skilled workmen from all my 3 provinces, and they shall build me a palace by the banks of the Yao River. The floors of this palace shall be so constructed that the weight of a man's foot upon them will make the boards sing like the voices of the birds of the Lu forest. In the midst of this palace I shall live out the rest of my days, lest my enemies creep up to me and kill me in my sleep.' And so the Marquis of Q, who was not a superior man, built the house of the singing floors by the banks of the Yao River. Because of the fear in his heart, the Lord of Q sat, day after day, in a large varnished chair, a mace on his knees, listening for the warning sounds of the singing floors. And melancholy took hold of his mind until men declared he was mad. The Lord Marquer then lacked the gift of understanding the souls of men, so he could not be aware that the main one of those conspiring against him was his own son, who coveted the riches of the 3 provinces. For this reason, the Lord of Q paid no attention to the warning sound resembling the chirping of forest birds when his only son brought him the cup of poisoned tea to the house of singing floors. So the Marquis took the cup from his son and drank the poison without fear. A great sickness seized him, and he knew he was about to die, and he killed his own son with the iron mace. Because he was strong and feared death, the Lord of Q struggled for 7 days with the poison in his body, but the malignant substance had consumed his life. So the Marquis of Q, who was not a great man, died on the 8th day at dawn, and his body lay in the house of singing floors by the banks of the Yao River. And the temporal lords of the 3 provinces assembled in the hall of the Fighting Lions and stood silent before the deceased, the tassels of their bonnets hanging over their eyes. The Lord Abbot of Chu Lung turned the prayer wheel and intoned the Bard of Death. When he had finished, the mandarins walked the path of the dead beside the corpse of the Marquis of Q, and they laid the body in a grey stone tomb by the banks of the Yao River. Then each of the lords returned to his home, and rejoiced in his heart that the Lord of Q, who was no high man, was dead. The venerable abbot of Chu Lung was reading the holy scriptures of our Lord Buddha when he perceived inwardly that a spirit wished to speak with him. He therefore allowed the incorporeal being to enter and be welcomed, and the spirit of the Marquis of Q stood before him in the hall of 10,000 books. The high abbot of the yellow hat brought tea and placed it before the spirit, and spoke thus: I perceive with my inner eye that my Lord of Q, who so recently took leave of his body, wishes to converse with me. Will you drink my tea? Has Inshu Lung Monastery? I will sit with the venerable abbot and drink his tea, replied the spirit. And since I have said goodbye to my body, there are some matters I wish to discuss with the bishop of the yellow hat. The saint of Chu Lung closed the book of holy scriptures and sat quietly in his chair, saying, I am attentive to the words of his late excellency, the Marquis of Q. My lord abbot, I am gravely disturbed because I perceive that although my body has died, I still live. The Mandarin of Q held the fine porcelain cup in both hands and sipped his tea. Then he continued, The circumstance is embarrassing and inconvenient. The bishop of the yellow hat bowed deeply and murmured, I have compassion for the misfortune of the late Lord Marquis. The spirit spoke again. I am immeasurably depressed at the prospect of continued existence, especially if I am forced to witness the mismanagement of my property by my honorable uncle, of distinguished endowment and poor judgment. I understand the unfortunate situation in which my Lord of Q is so unhappily placed, replied the abbot of Chu Lung as he poured more tea. I contemplate another possibility, the late Marquis continued. A few years ago I found it convenient to assassinate my venerated brother Viscount Fay. I presume he too survives in this detestable state. If we were to meet now, this would be very indelicate. The Lord Abbot clasped his hands in the long sleeves of his cloak and bowed his head in agreement. Then, I seem to remember that I contributed to the torment of my beloved father-in-law, Mandarin Yang, because he displeased me over a trivial matter. Another association between us might be considered unpleasant. That can be easily explained, admitted the Lord Bishop. The ghost of the Marquis of Q was silent for several minutes while shielding himself with a fan of peacock feathers. Then the spirit spoke again. Although my opinions on all matters are superlative, no, it irks me to discover a slight flaw in my judgment. Entirely contrary to my personal conclusions on the matter, I perceive that I am immortal. A man of your attainments will appreciate how this futile error undermined my understanding of my own infallibility, Only for the moment, my Lord Abbot. I am slightly confused. What would you suggest is the proper course of action for a man of my exquisite culture finding himself under these unpleasant conditions? After a suitable pause, the venerable abbot duly inquired, "Did the late Marquis of Q raise this difficulty with His Excellency the most wise guardian of the walls and ditches?" The Mandarin frowned slightly. Being a man of scrupulous honesty, I am forced to admit that, entirely due to the pressure of the moment, I have neglected this formality. I am also at another disadvantage. For a distinguished man such as myself, it would not seem advisable to continue unattended, for I have no retinue. A shadow of a smile crossed the face of the Bishop of the Yellow Hat. Perhaps the Lord Marquis will accept my services in this emergency. The Mandarin of Q replied politely, "Although we have disagreed on certain matters in the past, by nature I am above all pettiness of character. You have my permission to accompany me on this occasion." The Lord Abbot bowed his head with appropriate humility. "As master of the Chu Lung Monastery, my influence is always at your disposal." Then the venerable priest entered into meditation, and leaving his body he remained next to the deceased Marquis of Q on the shores of the Grey Land. "With your permission, we will advance to inform the inhabitants of this place about the arrival of the distinguished Mandarin, who was master of 3 provinces." They walked together a short distance along a wide path. The Lord Abbot was slightly ahead and on the left side, according to the circumstances. In front of them stood a tall, wide and deep gate, guarded by images of the Dragon Kings. Before the gate stood a large single-paneled teak screen, and in front of the screen sat the Lord of the Walls and Moats on a carved ivory chair. The imperial cap on his head bore witness to his dignity and fortune. The Bishop of the Yellow Hat advanced, and kneeling reverently, touched the grey earth of the road with his forehead. "Congratulations to the King of the Walls and the Ditches from the Abbot of Chu Lang, servant of our Lord the Buddha." The old man in the black chair raised his hand with a benevolent gesture. "The monks of the Enlightened One are always welcome at the door of my house. What brings you here, venerable sir?" "A circumstance of unusual importance, your Majesty. His Excellency the Marquis of Q, whose achievements you are undoubtedly aware of, entered the great land so hastily that he finds himself without a proper retinue." The old man sitting before the screen nodded. "It has been a long time since a prince arrived at my door with his good cohort." The Lord Abbot was very serious. "The Mandarin of Q honored me by allowing me to act as his chamberlain, and with this power I make his presence known to his august person." The god of the walls and ditches murmured in a windy voice as night fell, "The Mandarin of Q may approach my chair." The Marquis adjusted his robes and, advancing, bowed appropriately. The old man in the chair looked at him attentively. "My Lord of Q, what is your request?" The Marquis, not being a superior man, remained silent for a moment, unsure of his words. The Venerable One eased the tension. "The Mandarin of Q is overwhelmed by your august presence, and cannot speak out of pure modesty. He requests the right and privilege of passing through this door to present himself in person before the most serene of serenities, the Jade Emperor." The guardian of the walls and moats smiled benignly at the Lord Abbot. "Venerable monk, if this is your wish for the Marquis of Q, so be it. The request of the servant of the Buddha will never be refused. You may lead His Excellency into the great hall of the expanse of grace." Slowly the portals of the deep entrance opened on their weary hinges, and the Abbot of Chu Lung led the spirit of the Lord Marquis through the shadow-heavy threshold. Beyond was a vast corridor with pillars on either side. This corridor was so long that its far end was hidden in the mists of the distance. As they advanced, the Marquis of Q spoke in a low voice. The extraordinary splendor of the celestial world causes a natural anxiety to arise in my mind. Will the unusual grandeur of this region eclipse the brilliance of my achievements? If this were to happen, I would not receive the degree of deference to which I am accustomed. There is that horrible possibility, the Lord Abbot muttered behind his sleeve. Beyond the long corridor of pillars were stairs leading to heaven itself. In the middle of the stairs were the protective dragon stones that guarded the path against the demons of the underworld. When the High Abbot and the Mandarin finally reached the top of the stairs, the Jade Emperor's palace opened before them. They entered the hall called the Glory of the World. In the middle of the precious stone chamber was the throne pavilion, with columns of pure white jade. The throne house was draped with white silk curtains, as fine as the mist that gathers at dawn along the banks of the Yao River. In the farthest part of the throne pavilion, on a chair of shining green stone, sat Yu Huangshang Ti, supreme ruler of the mundane world and regent of the Heaven Father. His robes were jeweled with figures of the stars and constellations, and he carried the great scepter against his breast. The emperor's head was uncovered, and long dark hair fell over his shoulders. He was attended only by 2 lions lying at his feet. The abbot of Chu Lung advanced to the foot of the throne pavilion and knelt on a large cushion. Most powerful of all powerful, supreme emperor of all the kingdoms of the earth, I bring you the peace of the Lord, whose throne is supported by the crossed rays. Receive the words of praise spoken by the adamantine soul through the lips of its priest. We pay homage to him who has the face of the sun, my Lord Abbot, said a deep and beautiful voice from the Jade Pavilion. We also perceive that you have brought with you the spirit of the recently deceased Marquis of Q. Bring him forward and make him pay homage to the throne. The Mandarin of Q, greatly disturbed by the magnificence of the imperial person, advanced hesitantly, and with fear in his heart knelt on the cushion. Most transcendent, immortal, and heaven-honored Jade Emperor, receive me into your empire. The throne was silent for a long time, and then the Emperor of the world spoke. My Lord Marquis, our house is great and we are the rulers of 70 times 70 kingdoms. What is the wisdom of our Lord Abbot in this matter? The worshipful master of Chu Lung spoke slowly and with extreme deference. If it pleases your majesty, may the recently deceased Marquis of Q be appointed to guard the Emperor of the Eastern Peak. This is in accordance with the estates, for the Lord Marquis has no son to offer sacrifice in his memory. The Emperor of Emperors replied, We are aware of this unfortunate circumstance, and are acting upon the suggestion of the venerable Abbot of the Yellow Hat. May his august person, the Emperor of the Eastern Peak, approach the throne. A secret panel in the wall of the precious stone chamber silently opened, and a tall, majestic man, wearing long robes of yellow silk brocade, emblazoned with vermilion phoenixes, strode imposingly up the steps of the white pavilion. He raised his arm in salute to the throne, then stood proudly with his feet apart, and his hands buried deep in his broad belt. I am Tai Yo, Emperor of the Eastern Peak. I obey the summons of the Jade Emperor of the Middle House. The throne accepted the greeting with these words. Most gracious cousin, it is our pleasure that you administer to the needs, spiritual and otherwise, of the Marquis of Q, recently deceased and present here. May he be instructed in the rules of our kingdom. The ruler of 75 offices once again addressed the throne, who sponsors the Mandarin of Q. By what right does he enter our domain? The most venerable abbot of our Lord the Buddha, His Holiness of Chu Lung, Master of the House of the Yellow Hat. That is enough, thundered the Emperor of Eastern Peak. Let the Mandarin of Q rise and follow me. The Lord of Q, who was kneeling with his face to the jade-green floor, raised his head and looked for the first time at the Emperor of Eastern Peak. This august figure wore a black cap, and before his eyes was a long, thick fringe, so that his face could not be seen. The abbot of Chu Lung advanced and greeted the Mandarin of Q. I cannot go beyond this place. My body calls me and I must return. Your destiny is to guard those who turn the wheel of the law. Farewell, my Lord Marquis, until the great day is with us." The old priest turned and descended the stairs that led him back to the mortal world. The Lord of Q, who was not a high man, humbly followed the Emperor of the Eastern Peak, and they came at last to a mountainous place where twisted trees grew among the rocks. The ruler of the 75 offices led the way along a winding path to the entrance of a temple carved into the stone of a high cliff. Within the temple was an immense image, and before its face was a great mirror of polished silver. The Emperor of the Eastern Peak spoke. "The name of this mirror is the Eye of Destiny. Look into it, my Lord Mandarin, and pay attention to the shadow." When the Marquis of Q looked into the silver depths, the ruler of the 75 offices, with the black stripe over his face, stood beside him. In the mirror, the dark, still waters of the Yao River appeared, and the setting sun was silhouetted against the tattered sails of a fishing boat. The Emperor of the Eastern Peak murmured softly, "In this boat, my Lord Mandarin, you were born, you son of Kai the fisherman. You helped your father with his nets and gathered wood for his fire by the riverbanks. Is that not so?" "The mirror reveals the truth," replied the spirit of the Lord of Q, "but that was a long time ago. I was a child and had not yet sworn on my heart that I would become the river master." The scene of the luminous disk changed, and there was a high edge of land extending over the calm waters of the Yao. "I know this place well," continued the Lord Mandarin. "Many times in my youth I climbed those banks and gazed down the long course of the river. When I became master of the 3 provinces of Q, I built my palace of the singing floors." When the Marquis finished speaking, the form of a young woman appeared in the mirror. She had a broad, flat face, and her eyes were wide set and sad. Her body was strong, and she wore a short grey jacket. The Emperor of the Eastern Peak resumed the thread of the tale. "The daughter of the master of the nets longed to be the mother of your children. She would have given you many children to honor her father, and at dusk, when the boats arrived, you would have heard their songs swaying in the breezes of the river. It was then that the magic mirror became clouded with strife and destruction. There were battles on vast plains and before city walls. There were warriors in bamboo armor, riding ponies, and the air was darkened by arrows. There was smoke from burning cities among the hills, and long rows of new tombs rose on level ground." The ruler of the 75 offices continued, "This is how you became lord of the 3 provinces. You killed all who opposed your plans, and hung their heads on the walls of their cities. Is it not written that the place of the victorious general is among those who mourn the dead? Should I continue?" The Lord of Q looked away from the eye of fate. "Why am I besieged by these phantoms? In the mortal world, man must be master or slave. Whoever gains power must wrest it from other men and retain it at all costs. It has always been this way. Why am I blamed?" The Emperor, with the fringe over his face, made a gesture of mild apology. "Your Excellency the Marquis, no one blames you. No one would be so indelicate. You are only remembered. There is no blame unless you blame yourself. Be kind enough to look in the mirror once more." In the luminous surface, the Marquis of Q saw the palace of the singing floors on the banks of the Yao River. The Emperor of the Eastern Peak spoke solicitously. "Was it not here that you took refuge from your enemies and protected your life with an ingenious ruse that made the floorboards sing with the voices of forest birds? Was it not here that you died from the poison your only son prepared for you? Was it not here that you killed your son with an iron mace? And did you not come to my domain because there is no one of your blood to mourn your death? You were ambitious enough to leave the river, and in a palace of red and gold lacquer by the river, you found the end of ambition. Here perished the Marquis of Q, master of the 3 provinces, frightened, lonely and friendless. The Lord of Q remained silent, for his heart was heavy, his pride was gone, and a strange despair was devouring his soul. Finally he said in a low voice, "I knew the day of my death would come, but I was sustained by the conviction that I would die in silence and oblivion. I believed the world would remember only my valiant deeds, and that I would be called a superior man." "Unfortunately," murmured the Emperor of Eastern Peak, "it happened differently. The world forgot your deeds, and you remembered your mistakes, a regrettable but inevitable situation." The Lord of Q prostrated himself before the ruler of the 75 offices and begged him with these words, "Most august and powerful prince, I perceive that I must avail myself entirely of your wisdom and mercy. You have read the secret of my heart. I am not a superior man, I am the son of Kai the fisherman, and I am not educated, but I have a natural virtue, a product of my father, who was brave, though humble and illiterate. I will find my destiny with courage." The lips behind the black fringe responded, and the voice and the words were gentle. "On a certain day, long ago, the enlightened Lord descended from the Tushita heaven to redeem all creatures inhabiting the 33 worlds. He accepted into himself the illusion of the wheel and its 6 regions, and he appeared before the Jade Emperor's throne wearing a simple saffron robe, and he taught the 70 times 70 kings the mystery of the middle way that leads to great peace. And all the rulers and princes of the Yellow Road bowed down and worshipped the Enlightened One." "Heavy is the sin that weighs me down," groaned the Lord Marquis, "because in my ignorance I denied a cubit of my lands to receive the ashes of your holy priest." The Emperor of the Eastern Peak summarized his tale. "Thus it came to pass that the perfect Buddha walked all the paths of the grey world, and wherever his feet rested, blue lotus flowers grew, even on the dark surface of the lake of the second death. Because of him, your cause is not hopeless." The Mandarin of Q clapped his hands and raised them toward the ruler of the 75 offices. "Most noble and august prince, have mercy on the sickness of my spirit. Reveal to me the path of salvation, so that I may remake the mistakes I have made and attain at last to the great peace within my own heart." The Emperor of the Eastern Peak inclined his head approvingly, and the black fringe wavered before his face. "I will lead you to the ancient king who turns the wheel of the law. You will behold the wheel that turns eternally on the axis of ignorance. When you meditate on the mystery of the wheel, a slumber will attack your mind, and a dreamless sleep will take hold of you. When you awake from the sleep of centuries, you will be reborn as an infant in the boat of a fisherman on the Yao River. On that day you will be glad to mend his nets. And on that day too the house of singing floors will lie in ruins, and men will say that a cruel mandarin once dwelt there. But you will not remember that." The ruler of the 75 offices bowed and helped the Mandarin of Q who was at his feet, and they both stood up together. Then the Lord of Q asked this question, "Most august, who knows all the doings of my heart, why do you cover your face with the tassel of your cap? Who are you, if I may know?" "You may know that, if you wish, my Lord Marquess," replied the Emperor of the Eastern Peak, "but this too will be forgotten after you have seen the wheel. I am the superior man." Slowly he removed his black cap and lowered the tassel from his face, and the Lord of Q saw for the first time the features of the great prince. The Marquis of Q was so astonished that he could neither move nor speak, for the face he beheld was his own. The superior man placed his hand on the shoulder of the Marquis of Q. "And now it pleases the venerable abbot of Chulong that we go together to the ancient god of the wheel, the guardian of the book,